So, folks, I'm here again to present to you guys another wonderful call in to the Transatlantic Call In Show. This is a show I've been a co host on now for a couple months, and I'm really enjoying it. It's a show where people can call in and ask questions about trans people, trans rights, different aspects of trans-ness, if you will. Because not everyone knows a trans person and not everyone gets a chance to, ask whatever questions are on their mind. It is kind of an ask anything type of show about trans people. So check that out. This was with Josie Caballero. Go check out Josie's work. She's running for office. Very, very cool stuff. But also, folks, go check out The Line, which is the network that hosts this show, the Transatlantic Call-In Show. Go check it out. There's a link down below where you can go subscribe and also look at their merch and also do their Patreon thing. Go check it out. It's cool. And also down below is a link to the wider episode where this call was from. So check that out too. And like, comment, and subscribe. I'm going to say it again at the end of the video, just letting you know, but you should like and leave a comment longer than 8 words everywhere. All right. Anyway, let's get into it. I hope you guys enjoy it. It's a great time going on this show every time. Let's do it.
So let's go with Andy. He, him, also from Texas, wants to talk about brain studies and scans of male and female brains.
Let's do it.
Hello, Andy. You're live on the line. Thank you for calling in. Tell us about it. What did you want to talk about?
Hi.
Hi.
Let's see. Well, I guess first of all, I'd like to say that trans people have always existed and they always will.
You're here. Absolutely.
Up for debate at all. So as far as brains, I'd kind of like to preface this with talking about what the Supreme Court ruling on this. They're working on it. I guess Alito was talking to somebody, and basically the question was based upon whether or not someone's actually transgender or not, and how to define that as far as their gender. Specifically, whether it's just an identity or if it's actually something that can be pointed to be able to even rule on. That's kind of the gist that I got from that interaction with Alito, and I don't remember the name of the woman that was there testifying. So I've done I've been looking around, and I kind of got down this road due to a thing called DES. I don't know if you ever heard of that. Oh, it's a hard word. Crystal store, but it's real hard to pronounce.
Yeah, I haven't heard about it.
It's a synthetic estrogen that was given to pregnant women. It was believed to help prevent miscarriages. It was pulled from use in this 1971 after it, real quick after it was found out that I believe 7 girls developed a specific cancer that shouldn't have been had at their particular group age or whatever, and it was determined they were all DES daughters, so they pulled it. Later on, they were looking at DES sons to determine if there was any sort of cancer risk for them, and it was found out that a large percentage, like 25% of the DES sons that were participating in this study were transgender. And 25% is a pretty big number.
It is.
For transgender numbers, considering trans are like less than 2% of the population.
Yep.
So because of that, I got looking at other studies, and they were doing lab animal studies that show that if they are able to do hormonal disruptions on lab animals, that they can actually change whether or not a male animal's brain masculinizes in the womb. Because it's my understanding that chromosomes, that the blueprint, everything goes off. Later on in term, your brain masculinizes according to your chromosomes. sometimes that doesn't happen, and your brain doesn't masculinize. Now, we can't do those studies on humans because it's considered unethical or whatever, but the animal
Right.
studies show that. And then I got to looking at that I guess there was a Stanford study where they had 1,500 MRI scans, and they used an
Yes.
AI program that was able to identify with a 99% accuracy rate whether someone is male or female. And there
Right.
are other studies with MRI studies and postmortem studies that show there are differences
S-
between men and women's brains. I mean, it's not a lot. We're talking little
So,
differences here.
so Andy, I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate you going deep into this, and I am aware of some of these studies, and I think that there's gender is complex, and so are the human brains, and even in those studies that you're discussing about brain sizes in particular, there's still a large overlap, right, of people that are it's an average, right, but it still comes out to be a bimodal curve um, where some brains are still ambiguous enough on either side to kind of like, there's just no way to kind of like determine this 100%, but there is some interesting correlations that do exist. And as far as the hormone washes and things like that, we have some pretty good evidence to determine, that may have some of the correlations as well. Unfortunately, we can't get the causation yet, because it's still
Right.
incredibly complex as a situation. So I guess my question to you is, how does this interact with the current debate of what we're talking about when it comes to trans people and, what is going on in the zeitgeist of trans people versus, being able to exist or be able to play sports or go to the bathroom and things like that?
Okay. I think the main thing is the big pushback against trans people is woke ideology, and it's just an identity. And that the
Mhm.
people that don't understand that, they don't have anything to look at to say,
I
oh,
see.
okay, I get you. You'll hear like snide remarks like, well, I'll just identify as black. Well, no, because that's an actual physical thing that anybody with reasonable intelligence can determine whether someone's black or white. I mean, that doesn't require any extra proof. But within the transgender debate, there's nothing that can actually be pointed to for anybody to say, oh, I get it. Trans people are real because of this. Not
Yeah.
because right now there's this, oh, you're making it up. I know trans people. I have gender dysphoria as well. But like
Hmm.
trans people aren't just wanting that.
Yeah, Andy, and and
Most
and
trans
and
people sit in therapy for years trying to make it go away. So it's not
yeah,
like a choice.
and I will say this too. Like, and unfortunately, this happened when the gay debate was happening, where they were trying to find the gay gene so they could use this ability to say, look, there's a reason why people are gay, or, this is a story as old as time when it comes to trying to figure out why someone is the way that they are. And so for me, the way that I look at it is, even if you brought every piece of evidence and every piece of information to somebody who is, let's just say it, bigoted and will be closed-minded on this, they'll slap the studies out of your hand and say, I don't care, they should exist. And we have to look at this reasonably in a way that there are just people out there that are disgusted just seeing a trans person in society, or they're disgusted seeing a queer person in society. Hell, some people are disgusted to see a black person walking through their neighborhood. And so at the end of the day, I just feel like it's interesting. Like, I think the science of it is interesting. I was just having a really philosophical debate about, moral philosophy earlier. I loved having conversations about the mechanisms and the studies and things like that. It's just naturally I'm inclined to find that stuff interesting. But when I think about human rights and I think about policy and I think about, like, there just isn't going to be a piece of information or a data point that is going to align with every single trans person in the world. So like even if we were able to say yes, the brain study is like 99% accurate, like let's just say that's the case, and I still am very suspect if that's the case. What about the 1%? Do they no longer have the ability to transition anymore? And that's where I start backing off of the science side of it all, because the science side of it all, even though it may be good intentions to create an argument against bigots, will just find another way to discriminate against people. I would love to hear what Jack has to say as well about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like Josie, I'm fascinated by the science, right? And I am always skeptical a little bit about the findings of like brain stuff, largely because the science on that has seemed to swing wildly over the years. Because, obviously, as a trans person, I'm interested, so I pay attention to it. And several years ago, there was like one of the largest meta studies going over about like 30 years of different like brain sex differences findings. And what they discovered was that when you account for brain size, um, and you like kind of take that factor out of it, the differences between male and female brains are one like a 1%. Like it is almost indistinguishable in a lot of different cases. And because, as Josie mentioned, there's like this bimodal distribution of characteristics, like it gets really messy when you start diving down into like a more complicated understanding of what's happening. And you mentioned like hormone washes and stuff like that, which again, very interesting. But I think for the folks who need to be convinced to respect trans people, and who other like unless there's like a science like some kind of like concrete thing for them to hang their hat on, they refuse to do it. Something's going on with them that isn't related to like scientific evidence. Because they've already made the decision not to respect trans people. And I think for those folks, I would just make an appeal to history rather than to science itself. I think anthropology in particular is really, really interesting. Um, if you need like a resource on that, years ago, PBS put out a map of gender diverse cultures over the years and over like a long stretch of time around the world. And you can see different indigenous cultures, different on every single continent, like all parts of the world, who have had a concept of, more than two different gender identities. And like it starts to really paint a picture that for human beings, gender isn't just this like male female thing. It is actually much more complicated than that, even beyond the biology. And like I think a lot of folks, for example, don't really reckon with the fact that India, for example, has had a recognized third gender for, you know, uh, thousands of years. Like it, and I think a lot of this stuff just kind of comes from people getting stuck in the mindset of where they grew up and kind of losing that curiosity to learn about people who might be different than them, and respecting those differences.
Right. Yeah, I understand all of that, but it's just the whole, it has to come from somewhere. Like you hear people say, oh, gender is a social construct. Well, if it was a social construct, and I grew up doing all the boy stuff, including U.S. Army Airborne Infantry, Ranger, dirt biking, hunting, the whole business, you name it, I've done it all. Why have I always felt like I've had a female brain? It's a construct.
Yeah.
The
Hey,
Well, I mean,
idea of me being a
I was
female
in the
gender in
Navy.
a
I
male
did the
body
whole
has to
thing.
come from somewhere. Where?
I
Where does
mean,
it come from?
I think for a lot of folks, it can come from a bunch of different directions. Kind of, we're getting into almost like a nature versus nurture argument, and the reality is like it's super complicated. Like you are not just the product of your biology, you're also the product of all of your experiences and how you've been socialized, and like those things interact with, the biology that we're born with in like incredibly complicated ways that we haven't been able to untangle yet. And so there might be differences in your case, but that might not be true of all trans people. Does that make sense?
Sure, because everybody's different because the human is very
Exactly.
diverse.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you know, and I think that's what the beauty of humanity is, that little bit of mystery, right? Because you know, and I will say is like, why do some people like chocolate and some people like vanilla? It has to come from somewhere, right? Like, you know, and you could say that about anything, but then it just becomes trite after you start doing that, right? It's like, are we gonna figure out what the flavor gene is, or where the favorite part of your brain is linked in the way the DNA sequences is to make you more predetermined to like chocolate versus vanilla? Could you imagine if we at birth, like people are like, you're a chocolate lover at birth, and people are like, no, I like vanilla though. It's not fair. Why am I forced to eat chocolate? Why do they say that I love chocolate when I don't? And in you know, and I know I'm being a little bit absurd with the comparison of vanilla and chocolate versus gender identity, but at the end of the day, it's like I think that there's going to be a lot of neural maps that are going to exist from here until the sun burns out on how we put one brain synapses to another and why we come up to the conclusions that we come up with. And I think that tapestry of humanity that gives the humanity that color of being able to say we all like we have studies with identical twins and they can be completely different personality wise, they can be completely different orientation wise, sometimes they align, sometimes they don't, and it's those sometimes not and sometimes is what is always going to happen with a human mind. And I
I did
think
see something with twins here recently where it talked about how identical twins can more be trans than natal twins.
well, and again, it's still not it's still not the rule though, right? And
What about
that's what
2D, 4D finger ratio with gay and trans people compared to cis people and hetero people?
and you know, I love data too. Like I love science and I love the data and I love all of that, but every time we can say yes, it's like 50%, 60% of the time, there's still that 40% that isn't. And I think that is what I'm trying to get to. It's the exceptions to all of these studies is what is always going to be the controversial stuff, right? Even if you were to say
Right.
if you are twins and you know, even if we were like 98% of the time if you're a twin, you're going to be queer as hell. And that's just how it is. And then that 2% of those twins that aren't are going to be like, stop thinking I'm queer. Like I'm not. I you know, and then it becomes a problem again, right? And I think that's where we have to not be so rigid in our thinking, because the rigidity of it all is what's causing a lot of the issues in our society. Like we talked about at the beginning of this call, the trans population at best is probably 2%, right? And about
Right.
how many trans people exist. But that 2% matters, but to the 98%, there's a lot of people in the 98% that think that 2% doesn't matter. And
Right.
that is where we start having the issues. And as much as I wish that there was a magic argument that we can have around this issue, there will still be people that say, I don't care what the science says, they need to be cis no matter what. And you know, I've even talked to some trans people that say this. Not trans people, sorry, transphobic people who say this, where if a human was able to walk into a machine and change their entire genetic makeup to be, you know, let's say you're assigned male at birth and you go into the machine and you come out identical to a cis woman from gene to hair. Everything is completely exactly the way a cis person comes out. Those transphobic people sometimes will still say, still a man though. And they say, and what they say is it's their soul. It's like their soul is still a man. God intended them to be a man. I don't care if they walked into a machine that turned them
Who
into a
did?
cis woman. And I've talked to certain people who believe in sex gendered souls that believe that even if we were to take some type of magic machine that would change every cell in a human body to switch it over to a cis person, they would still believe that that person is a man, even if they went into a machine that did it, that changed them at the genetic cellular level down to a cis woman. And
I would say
that,
that's probably a pretty small percentage of
you'd be
people that have such
surprised.
a hardcore belief.
You'd be
Of course,
surprised,
there's a lot of people that
Andy.
believe in God. They have tried
Yeah,
daddies
yeah,
and argue with that.
yeah. And Andy,
I think,
and that's because you have, and Andy, this is because you have reason in your mind. You're a reasonable person and you use reason and data and science to help you come up to your conclusions. Your epistemology and how you come up to what is true is much more refined than someone who doesn't believe in that way. And there's a lot more people, unfortunately, that don't use reason as a tool of epistemology of how they come to what is true than there isn't. And I don't want to speak for Jack here, but myself, I am stunned by the amount of people who are completely ignorant to my existence and believe that their point of view and their world is the way that the world should be.
Mhm.
And that's why I just don't buy any argument that some people may be able to make that will change somebody's mind in certain ways, because their belief is not rooted in reason and fact. Their belief is based in feeling and emotion. And that is where we always come to an impasse with folks. And so that's why
right.
I
I
always say
think
the
that's
studies
where
are interesting.
I think that the whole belief and feelings thing, because you hear that from the right a lot, that facts over feelings,
Mhm.
is that this is the where it really gets into the whole trans debate, specifically around sports, because that's what is being talked about now, is the identity or the feeling that someone is, rather than having some sort of concrete thing to look at.
Yeah.
And until we be less rigid about this, the studies and the science and the brain, and the fact that we probably know more about the bottom of the ocean than we do about the brain. There's so much to learn that we can't
Absolutely.
rule things out at this point in time. And I don't think that this, like you talked earlier about, it could be decades before this gets sorted out, because it could take decades to sort it out. I don't necessarily think that we're going to come up with a solution anytime soon until there is something definitive.
And
Well,
and go ahead, Jack. Go please.
I was just going to add, there are so many unknowns in the conversation, and I agree there are a lot of those unknowns aren't going to be sorted out for many years or decades to come. But like one of the known things that we have, and why a lot of trans folks defer to identity, is because we can know how people wish to identify because they can tell us. And we can just believe them when they tell us that they want to identify in a certain way, and then we can treat them accordingly. And I think that that's a pretty important bedrock for gender identity in particular. And when we start talking about sports and how that works, um, sports have had rules that are attached to different like biological markers for a long time. Like for example, weight class. It's a pretty obvious marker for how sports have been divided in the past, and currently even. But also like it then I think Josie, we've already talked today about like how that as a policy can start getting really, really messy when the state intervenes. And so when it comes to like trans folks, the general rule of thumb has always been, and I've looked at the studies about this, like 1 to 2 years on HRT generally brings some level of competitional parity, in addition to just identifying. And like I don't see why the state needs to really get involved in any of that when the sports were managing just fine on their own prior to state intervention.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I heard a stat not too long ago. I don't know if you guys can confirm it, but it was basically, I don't remember the exact numbers, but like since 2003, there's been X number of Olympic Games with 30,000 women, and there's been 3,000 medals handed out, and not one single trans woman got a medal.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right. And even those facts, Andy, will not convince somebody who wants trans women to not participate. And
Yeah,
and so go ahead.
I think one of the big things that we're probably up against is a millennia of human instinct. Because pronouns aside, the human brain can look at somebody and determine, unless we're talking about, a very small percentage of people, that it's pretty ambiguous, and can look at somebody and say, I'm talking to a man or I'm talking to a woman. And it is basically that internal instinct to know who you're talking about just for survival. Because like as a dude presenting, even I would change how I talk to a group of dudes versus how I would talk to a group of girls, just based upon safety and security reasons. And it's just something that's in the mind.
But Andy, I would posit that that's actually socially learned, right? That's more than just like this isn't necessarily primitive, right? This is about societal training and learning, right? A group of women
testosterone's a hell of a drug.
Well, I mean, yeah, but if you're a woman walking down the street, trans or not, and late at night, and there's a big man walking toward you, you're gonna go to the other side of the street sometimes because you don't know,
right.
Because we've been socially trained to understand the stories of the other women that we know that have had the bad situations and bad experiences. So like if the world was different and that never happened, then I don't think that women would be trained to do such a thing. And again, it's just learned behavior. So Andy, you talked about something that I identified with. Somebody who I myself was in the military. I was, amateur bodybuilder in the military and everything. Like I was a very large person. I fought jiu-jitsu. I learned football stats. I knew every quarterback on every sports team. I drank beer. Guess what? I hated all that stuff. But I socially trained myself to like all of that stuff, to make or to pretend I liked all that stuff. So that way I wouldn't be clocked in the society that, hey, what's wrong with this guy? He's acting like a woman. And I literally put on a disguise. So therefore, I could socialize with these situations. That has nothing to do with my internal instincts. That's me living in a social construction, right? And so that's when I think about like we are trained in society to have these social constructions. If you think about before pan-Europeanism and whiteness, that was and colonization across the world. Before there really wasn't a gender category that was so strict. It was people just lived their lives and that's how it was. And people kind of just fell into the categories of who they were in society. It wasn't until the strict adherence of pan-Europeanism and colonialism and whiteness that started to bring dresses and suits to men and women in other territories. They used to call black people and Asian people genderless mongoloids. They just did not believe that a person could be civilized without the social construction of the gender norms that they understood them to be. And now we are living with the consequences of that being pushed on our society for a millennia. And now we are starting to deconstruct that in society. And that's where I think a lot of the trans debate starting to happen is that we, like you said at the beginning of this call, trans people have existed since the beginning of humanity. And it's only till recently that people are starting to go back to their roots of this gender construction thing's a little BS. Why do I have to live in this construct? And now we're starting to have these gender debates because of the fact that people people are just saying, hey, this is how I am. This is who I am. The same thing with queerness, the same thing with people liking chocolate versus vanilla, like people being left-handed versus right-handed. It's just who we are as people. And I think people have learned in our society, current and modern day, to be able to express themselves on who they are rather than having to mask and lie to society to fit in or not be called a witch and then burned at the stake because you're writing with the left hand instead of the right. Like this is the evolution of society, but it's also a deconstruction of what was put onto our society as well. And again, I don't know, I'm feeling very philosophical this show today, but that's kind of the way that I think we are at this point. And I think we just have to convince people that it's okay to identify the way that we identify, regardless of what the science says, regardless of what the studies say, regardless of all these things. We know trans people exist, so people should have the rights to exist. And again, that's kind of my point of view because I take a very social political view of gender versus someone who takes a very biological essentialist point of view of gender. And so that's kind of the way that I kind of move through the world. And my goal is to make sure everybody has the right to live with dignity and respect with the human rights that every human should be afforded. And that I think is where I kind of land on this fight. And I think you're right. It's going to take a long time for people to accept it, just like it took a long time for people to accept that gay people have the right to live in society at all levels as well.
And I just want to add real quick on there, like I think to kind of bolster Josie's point about social conditioning, um, your frame of reference really depends on like where you grew up. Like there again, one of my go-to references here is India, where they have a history going back. You if you open up the Kama Sutra, which is around 2,000 years old, that text, you find references to Hijra, the third gender that is in India. And like those people have existed for a very long time. And I don't necessarily know that, you know, in that context, people are going like man, woman, man, woman, because they have a different social condition there where there's also a third category that is just widely accepted. And, for us in America, folks more in the more recent years are being more comfortable identifying as non-binary. And like that is becoming more acceptable here in the United States. And so, like, I think the idea that we have like this biological ability to almost preternaturally sense who is man, who is woman. I think that starts to break down when you start looking at kind of humans on a wider scale than just our immediate context. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, just to me, it's just confusing because it's not like I was taught or learned or tricked or anything. The idea of having a female brain is something beyond me.
Yeah.
Like I have no control over it. It's like
Yeah.
I don't believe in Sky Daddy. It's like there's something, that I've been fighting against, but it won't go away. So there has to be some sort of root cause to it. And just like, Josie is talking about military, yeah, I'm ex-U.S. Army Ranger. I did it all.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I wasn't born in India. I was born in super rural, conservative, small town Ohio. So it's not like I didn't actually learn of any of the vocabulary until a couple years ago. So to even be like, oh crap.
Andy, you sound like me. I hate to say it, you sound like me when I was starting to come to the reality that I was a trans girl the whole time. Like at 8 years old, I knew I wanted to be a girl, but I pushed that down because I was also raised in conservative Texas myself, rural, small town, conservative Texas, where I didn't get the language and understanding that, hey, like I can live the way I want to live. I was forced into a box. If I was forced into a box so much that I joined the military to prove how manly I was, right? Like that is a very real thing, and it's something that you should think about, because I remember when I first started coming out as trans, or at least I started to, because I look, I think it's no secret that I am a nerd and I like to study and I like to just like figure out why things are the way they are. And I realized very quickly it was a fool's errand to figure out why did I feel like I needed to be a woman the whole time. There was just nothing I can do other than the fact of say, well, I guess this is just the way it is, and live that truth of who I was. And I'm a much happier person for it. I used to be a very depressed, sad individual. And it wasn't until I gave myself permission to say, this is who I am. And it wasn't an easy process. I lost a large member of my number of my families. I lost friends. I lost career opportunities. There was a lot of things that didn't go well when I lived my truth. But even with all of that, I still felt better as a person, and the depression went away. And that was how it worked for me. That's my story. That's my truth. It's different for everybody. But for me, that's what helped me do it, because gave up trying to understand and just started living who I am. And you can I was driving myself mad trying to figure out why. And in fact, I tried to figure out why for 4 years, because at 30 years old, I had a pretty good idea. Like I even learned voice training. I know we had this early in the call. At 30 years old, I was watching voice training videos, even though I was like still cis though, just in case. I'm just learning this just because it's just a fun thing to learn. And I did that all the way until age 34, and that was the moment that I was just like, I can't do it anymore. I just have to be who I am. And that was a much easier step for me than trying to understand the mechanism that made me a woman, because I just am, and that's just how it is. And cis people,
Right.
Andy, don't think about this as much as people who think about the fact the way you're putting it as I have a female brain and a male body. That's how you've put it into your words. Like cis people don't think like that. Cis people don't think, am I a man? Am I a man? Or am I a normal man? They don't think that way. They just are. Same thing with cis women. They just are. They don't even have the concept of thinking otherwise. Maybe a cis person may think a couple times in their life, oh, what if would it be like if I was a girl? But it's just a fun thought experiment. It isn't a what if I was actually a woman and happy? Like, that's a very different conversation than a cis person has. And
Right.
so I just I you know I just I hope you just think about that, Andy, because you will spin out, because I spinned out on the concept and the idea of why I felt the way that I am, and there has to be some biological way why. Believe me, Andy, I have been in that rabbit hole studying the brain sizes, studying hormone washes, studying why, and how often does this happen? How many people after the age of 25 think this way? Like I used to think it all. There was a moment when I was like, "Oh, I'm too old for this. I can't do it." There was even that crossed in my mind at one point. And then I realized that that was just another coping mechanism to try to force myself to think that it wasn't what it was. And so I'm not trying to say this is who you are, but I am saying that I had the same type of struggle that you were struggling with when it comes to the reasons why. And unfortunately, there is no concrete reason why. Just like your favorite food is the way that it is. There's no concrete reason why. It's just
I,
is.
this is why it's so hard, because you're talking about the spin out with the whole all female brain and a male body, which many, many trans women go through and wrestle with.
Hmm.
And that's the whole concept that the cis people, if the trans people can't even come to a conclusion to figure it out, the cis people are never going to understand, and you're just going to constantly get pushback on trans women in sports,
That's right.
because
But you know what? We
you'll
deal
never,
with it.
we're talking about sports. I think we need to back it up a little bit off of sports and just be like, let's let's just get some validity here, and then we'll worry
Yeah.
about sports.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of validity. Like there's like it is a scientific fact that trans people exist, you know? And like I think everyone who has struggled with their gender identity goes through a period where they are, why am I this way? Why am I this way? And in the same way that we're not necessarily going to have the why to every major scientific question about, how different celestial bodies function or different particles that pop in and out of existence in quantum mechanics. Maybe we'll figure it out, maybe we won't, but we won't necessarily know why. It just is, right? And in a similar way, trans people are like we exist, we're real, we're here, and like that's an indisputable fact. And so when the question is, well, why are trans people? And the answer is of like a million complicated reasons that go into that, um, that we may or may not ever be able to untangle. And the reasons why someone might identify differently are different from person to person. Um, that becomes like this impossible knot to untangle. And again, when it comes to the question of should trans, girls be allowed to play in sports against cis girls, I don't think it's necessarily the most material question. Like why do those trans girls exist? I don't know, but they do. And should they be able to play sports? I think so. And like ultimately where each individual comes down on what combination of factors resulted in them identifying in a certain way, um like it's fine. Like whatever
Yeah.
answer you come up with for why your brain is the way it is, like okay, go, like that's great.
Yep.
That might not be true of every other trans person though,
Yep.
and we kind of have to make our peace with that at some point. Like
Yep. Andy, my life was so much easier once I just let it go and just like, yep, I'm Josie. That's how it goes. And once I was able to do that and I breathe out that sigh of like acceptance, it was the my mind stopped spinning once I started walking down that path.
and I will just say also, like I come from a similar background. I didn't wind up joining the military, but I grew up in a, Christian fundamentalist household. Like my dad doesn't believe in evolution. Like I had like a pretty sheltered upbringing from a lot of LGBTQ people, and my only exposure to trans people was on like daytime television shows. So my concept of trans people was like people who beat each other up on Maori, or on the Jerry Springer show, or like, are brought on as like almost like zoo animals on the Maori show. And like
Yeah,
that
trans
was my
people
concept.
came with a laugh track attached to them.
Yep,
Yeah,
that's right.
exactly. And
That's
so
right.
when I started being able to articulate my gender identity, I was like, well, I'm not like those people, so I couldn't possibly be trans. And so I spent like a decade trying to figure out why am I this way? Like what like are and I eventually came to the conclusion trans people are great, but I couldn't possibly be
Yeah.
trans.
Yeah.
And I did every mental gymnastic trick that I could do to try and avoid having that realization. And ultimately I got to a point that I think a lot of trans people get to, which is that like I was like, well, I either transition or I like I can't continue this way.
Yeah.
And um because we understand due to our social conditioning what the costs are.
Yeah.
It's why it's so scary to like come
Yeah.
out as trans.
Yeah.
And like those costs, the way our society judges us, that's not connected to what our brain chemistry is or the structure inside of our brains. It's connected to how our society has like an unfair bigotry towards, trans folks,
Yeah.
and a desire to make us conform, um, with, innumerable numbers of ways of pressuring us, physically, mentally, socially, etc. And because I was never talked about by my parents about trans people. I didn't have the language, but I knew implicitly that it was not okay to act outside of like the gender role that I had been assigned.
Yeah.
And that education, I think, is something that we all get pretty deeply in
Yeah,
America.
absolutely. Well, Andy,
Yeah, I think the
I
educate.
hope this
Hang
was
up, hang up
nice.
on me. There's probably people on the line, right?
Yes, yes. Unfortunately, we do have to move on, but I hope that this conversation was helpful. And please forgive me if I saw a lot of myself in you. It's just kind of natural for me to feel that because, I care for you and I care about the feelings that you're having. And as somebody who loves facts and knowledge and science, it's a very strong rabbit hole that you can fall down that only makes you more anxious. So just be careful, okay? Take care of yourself. Be safe, all right?
Sure thing.
Yeah.
All
All
right,
right.
bye.
Bye, Andy.
Bye.
Oh my gosh.
I felt really
I
strongly about that one.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I know exactly the rabbit hole that Andy's in right now.
Yeah.
I've been there so deeply for so many years. I don't know how I survived, honestly, with the amount of anxiety I gave myself just trying to
Oh,
find the answer, like
oh.
finding the magic bullet, just being like, what is the thing? Just let me be explained, please.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, because I feel like for me, it came from a place of like, if I can explain it, then I can, do something to avoid it.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
conclusion.
Yeah. Exactly.
Um,
I feel that. I feel that.
well, that was a wonderful call, or a very contentious call. I I'm recording this many days later, and I don't remember how that call went. Let me know how you thought that call went down in the comments, and then go click on a link down in the description below to the original episode, and also leave a comment over there. We're trying to grow this channel and that channel, so go do the things, help both channels grow. You're getting a lot of content. Go do that. Go click the buttons. You know the buttons, the ones that you click on YouTube. Go click them. And also, folks, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's keep on going.
Riverboat Jack is coming to town. All the viewers gather round. Twitch and YouTube is where she streams. All that content is bursting the scenes. Politics, gaming, plenty more. Her sense of fashion you'll adore. So grab your stuff and hop aboard. We're going straight to Jack's